And
So,
he goes on to do a different word. So he does the word assume in the second. Uh, uh, he does it with the word assume in section 2 here, moving on from ruin, where it says he uses the Eliot um, quote from Prufrock. So the conscience of a blackened street, impatient to assume the world. Again, great fucking little line there, but he uses this idea of assume to make the same example. So he's like, if Eliot's using the word assume in a different or fresh kind of way, while still using this kind of history that has been built up behind it. Uh, my one question, like my one qualm with this, is I'm not sure necessarily that this type of thinking has the explaining power that Bloom gives it or thinks it does. So, like, at a certain point, the history and reduction of a phrase or a word can only give us so much insight into the poem, right? Like, there's still a limit as to what it can give us. Or, I don't know. I mean, what do you.
yeah, I mean, I guess there's always going to be a limit to what it can give us, right? And it also depends on how it's being used. So I guess we're going back to, it must be an authentic poem for it to even really matter.
Well, that's what I mean. So, like, if this poem, so either the word ruin or the word assume in the Eliot example, us going back and understanding, even if it's just subtext, us going back and understanding, like, the history of that word and how centuries of use have changed it and shaped it and made it mean all these different things. How much insight does that actually give us to the meaning on the page? Or I guess that's what I'm getting at.
You mean were the people who were making, I kind of zoned out for a second. Are you saying were the mean when people were writing these poems using these words that give us that history, were they all conscious of it?
Well, I mean, I think the answer to that would be no. They weren't conscious. And I think Bloom grants that too when he talks about kind of like the subconscious elusiveness or.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I'm just pushing back on this idea of like, I'm not sure that this has the explaining power of what is written down in front of me. So like when I'm reading Proofrock, uh, that my idea and the kind of, I would say, reductive history of the word, that occurs to me at all, or that it prevents me, if I didn't understand the larger history, if that prevents me from understanding the poem in some way. And I would argue that I don't think it does, as long as you know about one of the many thousands of meanings that the word could have.
So you're saying you don't necessarily need to be as well read in the history of each, you know, whatever of the language. You just have to be somewhat familiar.
No. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess that's one, but I think what I'm
I
trying
mean,
to.
it would have to be because like we're only somewhat familiar and we had to read the Odyssey. I
Right.
mean, which I guess is like, one of the first big ones you read, but like we had to read Shakespeare and we had to read like all these other texts that
Yeah, I mean, if you went to high school in America, you had to read Proofrock. I don't know if people actually read it or not, but. Or I guess maybe
yeah,
not
but
Proofrock. You read The
well, if you're
Wasteland or.
reading, yeah, if you're reading I mean, well, I guess that does sort of all of these kind of introduce you to the idea to begin with, I guess, because you're forced to look back.
And I
You're
get.
forced to go find out who all of the gods are when you read, the Odyssey.
Right. Well, they're dependent on that for meaning. So I get that Bloom is making the argument that even if we don't think about it, that we're still, authentic poetry or what he would call good poetry or the best of the best would be using these in, that same way. So like the newness. But then just because they're using it in newness, I don't know if that, like I said, it could mean that they're making good, better art, but does that mean that it's better understood? I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
No, I don't. Wait. So, okay, hold up. Because I need to clarify whether we're talking about this from the perspective of the writer of the poem or the reader of the poem.
Well, I mean, I would, for this purpose, we'll say reader.
So, does the reader have to be. So, state your question
Well,
again.
like, what does that offer them? So, like, we use this word assume, and we, besides telling us that this is like an original use of a familiar term,
I think
does
it
it
can open up
offer
the
us
yeah, I think it can open up the possibility of understanding
new meaning?
the
Is what?
poem
Yeah.
in different ways, or even possibly in some cases getting closer to the intention of the poet, maybe in some cases further away, finding a meaning that was different from the original intention. Well, people I think would say like there's no such thing as that. It should all be intended, and if it's there, the writer should be aware of it, essentially, is that argument as I understand it. And I think to a degree, I think Bloom would agree with that.
Yeah, that's be my only pushback about like something to use that. But if you want to move on to section 3 or